大家好, hello everyone. Today we're going to be installing a few parts and mods on the 2011 BMW 320i wagon, also known as the E91 by the chassis code. So here are the parts we'll be installing. The first one would be this intake manifold here. That's an intake manifold for the BMW 330i, which uses the same N52 engine as the BMW 328i. The only difference is the intake manifold on the 330i. It has the so-called DISA. It's a variable length manifold. And here in this book is an explanation of how the three-stage manifold works. So at low engine RPM, both valves are closed and the air flows directly into the cylinders. And mid RPM, one of the valves is open while the other one is closed. And in this case, cylinder 1, the one at the bottom, the intake stroke also just completed. The intake valve is closed on the cylinder that creates a pressure peak. The pressure peak travels through the resonance tube onto the next cylinder in the firing order, thus increasing the amount of air available for the next cylinder so it can make more power. And then at high RPM, both valves are open, and again similar story, the pressure peak travels to the next cylinder in firing order, and since both valves are open, even more air is available. A few other things we'll be installing. First is the valve cover gasket, which comes with a few other seals for other components on the valve cover, as well as the oil filter gasket. And since I'm already here, I'm also installing a brand new water pump and as well as the thermostat. I'll break up the video into three parts. The first part will be installing the 330i intake manifold. The second part will be installing the valve cover gasket and the oil filter housing gasket. And the third part will be replacing the water pump and the thermostat. Before the video begins, I just want to use my time machine again to travel to after I have installed the three-stage intake manifold. So for someone like me, with some but very limited DIY experience, what's difficult about replacing the intake manifold? The most trouble I had is with the pipe that goes into the empty space in the intake manifold. And it's a very confined space to work around with. You need to stick your hand in, squeeze the tab and pull the pipe off. I find that's very difficult to do. So just be patient, take your time, the pipes can be brittle, don't break it. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I completed my time travel. Let's jump back and begin the replacement of the three-stage intake manifold. Disconnect the battery. To get full access to the back of the engine, you first need to remove this wiring loom and then a few covers and panels behind that. The wiring loom is secured by three little tabs. Two of the tabs on my vehicle is broken, so they are held on by zip ties. To remove those, you just stick the screwdriver into the cover and then just pull the wiring loom out like this. This panel is for the interior air filter and is held on by a few 8mm clips. One of them here, here, on top here, and the same goes for the other side. To remove this piece, there is a wire connection goes into here, and then undo the rubber tab here, and one screw here, and another screw on the other side. And after those are removed, the cover should just slide out. You also need to remove these three clips for a second wiring loom underneath the plastic cover in order to remove the plastic cover. Just pry on the side and the tab should fall out like this. And the engine cover itself is held down by 5mm Allen keys. To remove the air filter box, we need to remove the connection for the duct there, remove the mass airflow sensor, and the two bolts here and there. The torques are T25s and the bolts are 10mm. Okay, so here are the things I removed so far. These two are the connectors for the diesel valve that will actually go onto the 3-stage intake manifold. And on the regular manifold, it just hangs off on the side of the intake, not connecting to anything. And here is a engine wire harness clip that I removed. Here is some sort of electric connector. There is another clip on the rear end. A clip here connecting to the intake manifold that goes onto here. The thing I wrapped in the paper is the electric connector for the mass airflow sensor. And there are 2 screws hidden underneath this wiring harness. That's very difficult to see. You can only feel around. Next, I'm gonna remove these 2 screws holding the power steering fluid reservoir. You do not need to disconnect the reservoir, just push it aside. I'm gonna remove the tower brace on both sides. If we are only changing the intake manifold, only this side needs to be removed to open up the access. But since I'm also changing the valve cover, I'm gonna remove the other side as well. And then there are 2 oxygen sensors on top of the engine, one here. The other one is hidden underneath the engine wiring harness there. I'm gonna disconnect those. Okay, next I'm told to unmount the fuel line but not disconnecting it. So it looks like there are 4 screws, one here, and 2 on the other end connecting it to the engine block. But I don't think it's connected to the intake manifold by any means, so I'm gonna leave it in place for now. I may need to remove it later. So now I'm gonna go ahead and connect these screws holding on the intake manifold, and after that it should allow me to lift up the intake manifold just a little bit so I can disconnect all the wire hidden underneath it. Intake manifold are held down by 11mm bolts. There is a clip holding on the fuel line at the very end. Gonna remove that. There is a sensor plugging into the oil filter housing that's in the way, so I'm gonna disconnect that. So I managed to pull the intake manifold like this, and following the fuel line, that's the fuel line. It goes all the way to the back. I undid this clip which went down to here, and then there is some sort of clip underneath the intake manifold that I'm not able to see, but I can feel it. I think I need to disconnect that. And here is that clip that we've been looking for. Okay, now looking underneath the intake manifold, there's a electric connector and a hose there. There is another hose there. Okay, here is what it looks like with the intake manifold removed. This one is very painful to remove. It's seated in between the curve of the intake manifold, so it's really hard to get to. These will be connected to the new 3-stage intake manifold. Okay, so now I have the old intake manifold on the left and the new 3-stage intake manifold on the right, side by side for comparison. The kit comes with 3 screw sizes, 5 screws out of the smallest size, 2 screw intermediate size, and 1 screw the longest size. 4 of the smallest screws goes onto the diesel valve here. Two of the intermediate ones goes into the 2 screw hole here for the diesel valve on the other side, and one remaining longest screw goes onto the 3rd hole for the 2nd diesel valve. I'm not yet sure what the 5th shortest screw is for, so I'm gonna put it aside for now. New throttle body gasket. The tightening torque for the throttle body is 9 Newton meters or 80 inch-pounds. Okay, time to install the new cover. You need to get this foam like pad from the old intake manifold. Here is the 3-stage manifold with everything transferred over. So here is a diesel valve on this side. You need to transfer over the throttle body held on by 4 10mm screws. Some screws for a clip here, electrical connector here, a screw for a clip here, screw here, and a clip here that's for the oil line. No, actually that's for the fuel line. You can see the 2nd diesel valve here on the back side of the throttle body. Ventilation hose here, which come with its own O-ring. Obviously the throttle body also has its own O-ring. That's everything that needs to be transferred over. Just when putting this back, don't forget to put on new seals for the intake ports. These 2 connectors that previously hanging on the side of the previous intake manifold needs to be connected to the 3-stage intake manifold. There is a cover on the connector that we need to remove. To do that, use a small pick tool or screwdriver. Gently pry up this tab and pull this cover out. And this is what it looks like with the cover off. This is the intake manifold in place. This is the electrical connector to the diesel valve on the front. There is another diesel valve connector in the rear. There's 2 ventilation hoses on the back, an electrical connector to one of the ventilation hoses, and another hose that's hidden behind the curved part of the intake manifold. I remember that was a pain to remove, and it's a pain to reconnect as well. There is a electrical connector to the throttle body. There is a electrical connector here, a clip there, a clip there, and a clip back there for the fuel line. Also, there is a metal bracket that's mounted here. When you install the hose and the bracket, make sure the hose goes behind the bracket. With everything installed, next we need to torque down the nuts and bolts on the intake manifold to 15 Newton meters. That's it for today's video. As people always say, install is the reverse of the removal. Just make sure that you reconnect every electrical connector, reconnect all the hoses, and you should be good to go. So, until next time, and happy DIYing! 再见。